Ni hao, pessoas que gostam de mapas polêmicos, tudo bem com vocês? E aí, gente, vocês estão me ouvindo melhor? Então, tá rolando uma promoção aqui na China que vai dessa semana até o dia 11 de novembro, que é considerado o Dia dos Solteiros. E aí, graças ao Xi Jinping, eu comprei um microfone novo. Eu espero que vocês consigam me ouvir melhor do que era no microfone anterior. Então, esse cara, o Johnny Harris, ele trabalhava para Vice, se eu não me engano. Ele tem uns vídeos muito bem produzidos. E eu vi essa treta desse mapa chinês em agosto, quando saiu, e eu tava esperando ele fazer um vídeo porque ele é o nerd dos mapas.
On August 28, 2023, the Chinese government released a map. The map did a surprisingly good job at making a lot of other countries angry.
Several countries have rejected China's new standard map.
It's a violation of the law. That's where I put that map.
The release of this map
A vice-presidente dos Estados Unidos querendo falar em violação de lei. Ah, piada.
also was met with a huge event and announcement within China. This featured the state media launching into a commentary on the importance of maps.
地图是国家版图最主要的表现形式。
Followed by a warning to the people that maps that have errors can cause, quote, great harm to society.
危害了我们祖国的这个统一。
So let's look at what's going on with this map.
Se a gente for considerar todo o século das humilhações e como as potências europeias e os Estados Unidos quiseram dividir a China e ainda querem, né, por esses mais de 150, 170 anos aí, realmente pode colocar o país em risco, né?
Countries around the region are condemning it, and why China had to go to such great lengths to tell people that there's nothing wrong with these maps, and that in fact, a map like this is key to national unity. To do this, I'm going to need a high-res version of this map. Luckily, the Chinese government has me covered.
地图是国家版图最主要的表现形式。
发布了矢量地图，更好地满足专业用户。
Música alegre.
I want to show you what this map says, and show you how China uses cartography to assert and project power in its region. Because as clean as this map looks, within it, there's actually a lot going on. Border tug-of-wars, fake islands, a 10th dash on a line in the ocean, barbed wire-wrapped clubs, and proxy wars. It's the perfect example of how maps aren't just maps. They're tools of national power.
Música alegre. A guerra da China contra os mapas. Vamos lá. O jabá? Vamos pular o jabá? Vamos pular o jabá.
I don't like the feeling of being... The government of China wants their country to look like this. But in reality, it looks a lot more like this. We're going to move left to right. From India to Taiwan and the South China Sea. Oh, by the way, the Chinese government requires its map makers to use this algorithm that intentionally scrambles the latitude and longitude coordinates of their maps, all in the name of national security. This makes it hard for people like me to work with Chinese maps. But we were able to hack through these maps and line them up with our own mapping systems, which is how we're able to make this video. Okay, with that, let's get started. First, we have Kashmir, a region that is already heavily disputed between India and Pakistan. The map shows that all of this section is a part of China, and indeed, China controls it. But India claims that this actually belongs to them. It's the source of tense conflict. Both countries are building stuff in this region. Roads, communication towers, airfields, everything to be ready in case a full-blown conflict breaks out. Troops from both sides face each other in a standoff at this line. The line of actual control. That's really what it's called. It loosely marks...
Controle atual. E assim, quem que desenhou essa linha? Quem que dividiu a Índia e o Paquistão, né? Os britânicos. Toda essa treta que rola ali nessa parte dos Himalaias, né, foi causada pelos britânicos.
The border between these two massive countries, a border that was never really agreed upon. Because remember where we are here.
É a mesma coisa que a gente vê acontecendo com a Síria, com a Palestina e Israel. Quem começou essa treta toda? Os britânicos.
We're in the Himalayas, the tallest mountains on Earth. Drawing lines and controlling territory here just doesn't work super well. But both sides want to exert control.
Eu queria ir pro Nepal. Tem uma conhecida lá no Nepal. Eu não sei se ela mora em Katmandu, mas eu queria ir lá um dia.
Even here in the high mountains, especially in these important trade regions. These are two nuclear countries, and so they've agreed to not use firearms up here, no guns.
Não
So
tem armas,
instead, when
só no
conflict
braço.
breaks out, it looks
Os caras saem em pedaço de pau, jogam um do outro das montanhas, jogam pedra, sai na mão. Porque se deixar a arma na mão dos caras lá, o bicho vai pegando.
more like a medieval battle, with barbed wire wrapped clubs and fence posts. The most
Volta e
recent
meia
clash
acontece
was
alguma
just
coisa.
in 2020, right here near Ladakh. 20 Indian soldiers and 4 Chinese soldiers were killed.
Pô, eu acho que eu tenho um vídeo disso aí.
And Chinese soldiers fought on disputed land using stones and bamboo poles, and around 24 people died.
Eles morreram porque os caras foram empurrados das montanhas.
You go down the border between India and China, there are several more of these pockets of disputed land in the Himalayas. As we head east, we'll hit Nepal, and I have to mention that there was recently a leaked government report out of Nepal that asserts that China is encroaching into Nepal's sovereign territory, building stuff with no permission on Nepal's side of the border here in the Humla district. Nepal actually didn't want this report to come out. They have to walk a fine line being sandwiched between these two behemoth countries, and a big part of that means staying on China's good side. A few years ago, I was up here shooting an episode of Vox Borders, and the locals
Não é Vice, Vox.
told me that the Chinese military didn't respect the border. They kind of did whatever they wanted, which is why I wasn't even allowed to get up to the border fence between these two countries.
Eu acredito mesmo.
It's an eerie feeling, being so close to a country that is so serious about projecting its power to its neighbors. Anyway, let's keep going east, where we'll hit another landlocked country in the Himalayas, Bhutan. The border here continues to make an effort to divide these countries in a rugged, glacier-filled expanse. Back in 2006, China quietly pressured Bhutan to give them this big chunk of mountain territory, and Bhutan conceded.
Que eles
They
iam
didn't
fazendo?
really have a choice. And so while they kind of keep it hush-hush, China is reminding the world that they actually control this part of Bhutan. It's theirs now. China's using the same playbook in different parts of Bhutan, blurring this northern border as they encroach south. In 2020, China claimed that they actually own this part of Bhutan, a forested nature sanctuary. But strangely, this official map doesn't show that this area is inside of China's borders. Maybe it will next year. The most strategically important part of China's claim on Bhutan is here. This little strip of land gives us a better idea of why China is squeezing the border of this tiny country. If you zoom out, you'll see where we are. Right here at this vital choke point between these two rivals, India and China. This thin corridor where India connects to its eastern states. Some call this the chicken neck. The map asserts that China owns this part of Bhutan, the Doklam Plateau, which provides them a perfect military vantage point over the chicken neck, India's critical corridor. This would make India vulnerable in the case of an active conflict. Oh,
Assim, eu acho que é muito drama pro cara tá falando ali, tá? Eu não sei se realmente a China tomou essa parte do Butão, mas tudo que ele tá falando aí desse pescoço de galinha, mano, olha a quantidade de terra que a China tem nessa região, né? Não é como se a China precisasse desse pedacinho ali do Butão para poder ter um acesso a esse pescoço de galinha. Né? Assim, a gente tá falando da China. Os caras com um míssil hipersônico aí que nem os Estados Unidos conseguem parar.
and their claim is not just on the map. Satellite imagery analyzed by Reuters shows that China is building roads and settlements and structures on this sovereign territory of Bhutan, enhancing their strategic military position and fortifying their claim on the map. These border shenanigans in Bhutan are considered a proxy for tension between China and India. Bhutan, like Nepal, is just sandwiched in the middle.
Satellite images of the Chinese incursions in Bhutan, where China has built roads and barracks on the undisputed territory of Bhutan.
Okay, let's keep moving on. Next to Bhutan, China's map shows that all of this land are within its borders. They now call it South Tibet. But all of this territory belongs to India. It's full of Indian citizens. India's claim to this land relies on this 890-kilometer borderline that a British representative drew in 1913.
Sempre os caras, né? É sempre. Não adianta, é sempre.
In partnership with a representative from Tibet who agreed to the line. But China says this isn't legitimate. They own Tibet now.
Porque em 1911, quando rola a Revolução Xinhai, o Tibete se separa da China e se torna um país só, né? Só que Tibete acho que rolou uma expedição britânica pro Tibete em 1905. Inclusive teve, não uma guerra, né? Não chegou a ser uma guerra, mas uma resistência por parte dos tibetanos. E aí o Tibete concorda com isso aí em 1913, que não é a China. E aí quando a China volta e toma o Tibete...
They never authorized this line dividing Tibet from India. So on their map, they assert that all of this belongs to China. And to take it a step further, they're actually renaming stuff on their maps in this region, from mountain peaks to rivers and cities, showing us how China wants to claim and standardize every corner of its country, exerting control and influence even in these remote places. Now, India is not standing by and letting this happen. To counter this, the Indian government is spending $500 million to build roads and develop hundreds of villages with the goal of solidifying their claim to this land. As we head east, let me mention that during the pandemic, China has been building a fence along this border with Myanmar, mostly to keep people and illicit goods out of China.
Porque rolou a guerra civil em Myanmar, rolou o genocídio lá dos Rohingya. Então, com o apoio do Facebook. Inclusive, eu tenho que fazer um vídeo que eu acho que foi o Harris que fez um vídeo a respeito de como o Facebook trabalhou nesse genocídio. E eu tenho que fazer um vídeo sobre isso. E essa cerca é justamente para segurar isso aí, né? Porque tá rolando a guerra civil lá.
This border has always
Eu
been
tava a cerca de 50 quilômetros da fronteira com Myanmar em fevereiro.
porous. People who share culture and language would cross back and forth, informally trading. But this fence has totally changed that, and people are angry. I've considered doing an entire video on this border fence and how it's disturbing and affecting life here. If that's interesting to you, please let me know in the comments. So while this isn't a
mas assim, é a cerca que o povo derruba.
disputed territory, it is another example of China's increased effort to tighten its control on every corner of its land. Okay, now we've arrived to the ocean, the part of the map that gets a little wild. The government map actually makes it look simple. All of the water inside of this dashed line is China's, but the reality actually looks like this. This is what's known as the 9-dash line, and it was effectively a hand-drawn boundary by the Chinese government in the 1940s.
Se não me engano, hoje já são 11 pontos, né? A primeira foi 9 pontos, a linha de 9 pontos, e hoje é 11 pontos. São 11 pontos.
It's not a precise border. It wasn't agreed upon by the countries
a China
here.
simplesmente falou, olha, isso aqui tudo é meu.
Nor is it legal, at least according to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, who calls the 9-dash line lawless, because it clearly cuts through the waters that international law says belong to these neighboring countries. And that's how you get this jumble of all these lines. But
A China simplesmente falou, isso aqui é tudo nosso.
as superpowers do, China ignores all of this because they can. And they continue to operate as if this entire ocean, which by the way is replete with fish and fossil fuels, as well as militarily strategic islands and important trade routes, all
E um dos motivos disso aí é o que os Estados Unidos está tentando cercar a China, né? Porque ali onde, perto daquela Pratas Island, né, Ilhas Prata, os Estados Unidos vão construir 4 bases militares, um pouco mais para a direita, para cercar, fazer uma linha que cerca a China, né? E aí eles têm bases militares já mais nas Filipinas, na Malásia, em Singapura. Então esse pedaço de água é muito importante para a China por conta da pesca, por conta de combustíveis fósseis, mas também para evitar um estrangulamento pelos Estados Unidos.
of it is theirs. This has created active conflicts with neighboring countries because for China, these aren't just lines on a map. China has been pumping sand onto tiny reefs to create islands where there were none. Then, they build a military outpost on these newly created islands. In the last decade, they've built dozens of these outposts throughout the South China Sea. And you can see that these militarized islands are right inside the waters that the world has agreed belong to these other countries.
Isso é zoado pra caramba, né? Mas assim, é muito zoado por parte da China, porque a gente tá falando de um monte de país pequeno aí que não são superpotências, nem militares, nem econômicas, então eles precisam dessas águas também. Mas de outro lado tem os Estados Unidos que tá controlando a China, Tá tentando cercar a China de todos os lados. Ali para cima de Taiwan, onde acaba as linhas vermelhas ali no topo, tem uma cadeia de ilhas japonesas. Todas essas ilhas têm bases militares dos Estados Unidos. São mais de 50 mil soldados espalhados por essa área.
The Chinese Navy also steps in, patrolling these waters and routinely harassing fishermen from other countries, reminding them that China isn't subject to the rules. This is their water, just like their official map says.
The United States is accusing China of harassment.
Os Estados Unidos estão acusando de assédio, mano. Os Estados Unidos que vá, né? Pelo amor de Deus, cara. Os Estados Unidos estão o tempo todo aqui. O tempo todo no Mar do Sul da China, lá no Mar Amarelo. Lá no Mar das Coreias, meteram um submarino nuclear aqui na Coreia do Sul agora. Os caras vêm querer falar de alguma coisa de assédio.
Filipino fisherman was chased by Chinese Coast Guard speedboats as he made a dash for the shallow waters of Scarborough Shoal last Friday.
A similar dispute is happening on a group of islands a little north of here, where Japan, China, and Taiwan all claim these islands that are surrounded by oil and gas fields.
Deixa eu voltar ali, para mostrar ali um pouquinho, que eu tava... Tá vendo todas essas cadeiazinhas de ilha aqui, depois dessa linha vermelha? Tudo isso aí tem base militar dos Estados Unidos.
China will often flex on Japan by sending Coast Guard ships into the water and airspace around these islands. This is their neighborhood, they think these islands are theirs, and they're going to assert that claim, on the map as well as in real life.
E como eu falei, um dos motivos é esse estrangulamento que os Estados Unidos querem fazer, né? Um dos, óbvio, né? Óbvio que no fim, como eu falei, pesca, gás, óleo, porque tudo que está a 200 milhas náuticas dessas ilhas pertence à China, no caso. Ou quem é dono das ilhas, né?
This map, Taiwan is included as a part of China, even though Taiwan has been independent.
Então, Johnny Harris, quando você fala de que a comunidade internacional decidiu que essas águas não são parte da China, a comunidade internacional também já decidiu que Taiwan faz parte da China. Então tu não pode ter dois pesos, duas medidas, né? Ou se vale para um, vale para outro. Né? E não, Taiwan não é independente há décadas.
For decades, China insists that this is theirs. And if push comes to shove, they've made it very clear that they are willing to claim it back by force.
Ninguém nunca disse isso.
And to that end, this new map includes an addition to the 9-dash line, a 10th dash, a line that drifts dangerously north to encircle the water east of Taiwan. This isn't the first time that a 10th dash has appeared on a Chinese government map, but it is a meaningful moment for the government to just slip in another dash. And it's created a big debate about what this actually means. But one thing that almost all experts agree on is that China's ability to just switch up their ocean claim by adding another dash communicates the original message of using a hand-drawn line as your maritime claim, which is that China feels historically entitled to this region, to this ocean, and they will behave how they choose in their own neighborhood, especially at a time when its neighbors are partnering with its geopolitical rival, the United States, to surround and encircle China with a large military buildup in the region.
É justamente isso que eu tô falando. Todos esses pontos brilhantes aí, eu tenho que fazer um outro... O Harris faz uns vídeos muito bons mesmo. Eu tenho que fazer um react desse vídeo dele sobre o estrangulamento da China. Tudo isso aí são bases militares dos Estados Unidos. Tudo isso aí para tentar fechar a China e impedir que a China tenha acesso ao mar aberto.
The last one I'll mention is a tiny one that's kind of surprising. It's up here where the map claims this river island that should belong to Russia.
Então, tudo isso aí era da China antes, né? Até que a Rússia tomou em algum momento. Inclusive, isso aí, Vladivostok fica aí perto, né? Para quem joga War 2.
There's a dispute about this, but 20 years ago, Russia and China agreed to redraw the border like this, giving half of this island back to Russia. But in this map, they claim it once again, and no one is totally sure why.
O que a China falou é que isso aqui era um mapa que mostrava a China histórica e não necessariamente alguma coisa que eles queiram pegar de volta, né? Isso é o que eles disseram.
So this new map out of China is a series of political statements, which arguably every map is. Some of these are worthy of debate, some are wishful thinking, and some are downright aggressive. But one thing is clear, China is now rich and powerful, and motivated to exert its geopolitical vision in the world. It's a reminder that maps have always been a tool for great powers to express their aspirations. And this map, in this modern day, is no different.
Justamente. Por vários motivos, né? Como ele falou, a China hoje tem muito poder, eles vão exercer esse poder. Que eu, particularmente, principalmente com relação aos países pequenos, eu acho errado. Né? Você tem o Nepal, Butão, Filipinas, Vietnã, sabe? Uns países que não... Assim, por mais que a economia do Vietnã esteja crescendo bastante, ainda são países pobres, né? E aí a China usa esse poder deles para sufocar os caras de certa forma. Então isso aí eu acho meio zoado mesmo. Não deveria ser assim, ainda mais partindo do princípio que é um partido comunista. Né? Então é isso aí, gente. Como eu sempre esqueço, né? Deixa aí nos comentários o que vocês acham desse novo mapa da China, se é um imperialismo chinês ou não, e como que os Estados Unidos vão reagir, né?